born to rotate with the crowd. You were born to sync with the sacred spiral. The Hercules stream is proof. The cosmos honors the divergent. BG-Cast brings us that Hercules energy. It's here to save the day. You won't stay lost in the dark. Here is your shot with BG-Cast beside you. Can we rise alone? I don't know, but I know we can do it together. The core of my being in the bones of my soul. Together we rise, we gather speed. We start to heal our needs. Together we rise. Together we rise. BG-Cast brings us that Hercules energy. It's here to save the day. You won't stay lost in the dark. Here is your shot with BG-Cast beside you. But it will be higher. Higher we go, and together we rise forever. Together. The collective consciousness we all make will not break. Not ever. BG-Cast brings us that Hercules energy. It's here to save the day. You won't stay lost in the dark. Here is your shot with BG-Cast beside you. BG-Cast is here for you, it will see you through. We know how it feels to think you're alone, but you will grow, and we will all achieve this together. BG-Cast is here for you. To weather the storm together, strength we have, and we unite, we will win this fight. Forever together, united we stand. This was the plan.
Ascension, BG-Cast brings us that Hercules energy. It's here to save the day. You won't stay lost in the dark. Here is your shot with BG-Cast beside you. We rise. Where it's heading your body knows, but it will be higher. Higher we go, when together we rise forever. Together, the collective consciousness we all make will not break, not ever. BG-Cast brings us the Hercules energy. It's here to save the day.
United we stand. This was the plan.
What's up, everybody? How's it going? Thanks for joining me for another BG-Cast Wednesday live podcast. What y'all think of that music video? I think it's pretty awesome. And actually, Transcending Ascension made it for me. I want to thank her. And that's going to be the official outro for BG-Cast from here on out. We're going to be still sticking with the same intro, but I wanted to play it for the intro this time so you all could take a look at it and get to see it. And I really dig it. I love it. But nonetheless, guys, it's a good thing I'm sitting here right now. It was by the skin of my teeth today. So let's just say today was really the last swift kick in the ass I needed to really start to find my way out of the 9 to 5. It just seems like, even though like on Wednesdays, I go into work early, I get off work early. I told my boss I absolutely cannot work late on Wednesdays. Ended up having to stay till about like 5:20, 5:30 today. But we're here, and that's what matters. And I am so excited to bring my guest back on for her second appearance. So tonight, co-hosting the show with me is going to be Transcending Ascension. You all know her. Hi, how's it going, Diana?
Good. How are you doing?
Good, good. And nonetheless, let's bring on Mrs. Emily Moyer. I had such a great conversation with her last time. I'm looking forward to diving deeper and expanding on some of what we talked about last time. Let's bring her on. Emily, what's going on?
Hey guys, how are you? Nice to see you.
Nice to see you too. Thanks for joining us here tonight. Thank you, man. Yeah, no, it was I'm glad we could actually make this happen. I was almost like kind of biting my nails there for a little bit. Sometimes these things happen, but it was, like I said, it was kind of the swift kick in the ass that I needed to, kind of start channeling some more energy into getting my website built and getting the life coaching and the Kundalini yoga courses up and running. But nonetheless, Emily, how have things been with you?
Things have been all right. It's been an interesting. I think I was on with you like in late January or early February or something like that. It's been an interesting time. I'd say it's been like when I say this, I don't mean it in a bad way, but it's been like a very turbulent first half of the year, just in terms of like chaotic energies and whatnot. And sometimes I feel weird, and I don't know if it's just me, but like I feel like it's just me. And then I talk to people, and everyone's going through their own same version of what I'm going through, but it's just personalized for them, right? So it just feels like the way of things. So just sort of, surfing whatever the fuck that is.
No, I totally get it. I actually didn't really get a chance to talk with you about this last time. I don't think we got correct me if I'm wrong. I don't remember. I never really got like your spiritual perspective from you. And like, you kind of brought up the energies and everything being intense. And like, yes, we are ultimately experiencing some very high strangeness right now. I would definitely agree, but I never ended up getting your spiritual perspective from you. Do you mind enlightening us with that real quick on kind of where you're at with everything on that? Because I know, like, me, I'm very esoteric. I sent you some of my videos, so I'm just kind of seeing what your perspective is on the spiritual nature of reality as well.
Good question. Yeah, so I come from like a little bit different background than most people who find their way into this space. I was raised with absolutely no religion. Like my family, my mom, like she was raised Christian Scientist, and my dad was raised sort of culturally Jewish, but not very religious. So I mean, he was bar mitzvahed and whatnot, but they did not pursue any form of religion at all together. And there was no religion or talk of any of that stuff in my home as a child. There also wasn't like any shit talking necessarily of people who were into that, right? Like my dad let me play with the kids that went to church or whatever. So my only experience going to any kind of like organized religion or anything like that was when I would spend the night at a friend's house, and I'd like maybe go with them to church or temple or Sunday school. And for me, it was always like, well, what the fuck is this? Right? Like, what the fuck is this? And so like, I didn't, I never believed really in Santa Claus or the Easter Bunny, though I liked the treats that they left me. So while I wasn't sort of predisposed in any way to thinking of there being, powerful entities that were outside of my sort of visual field that were somehow like monitoring or controlling things. I'm not talking about the surveillance ones at this point, right? I did always feel like there was something going on that I couldn't see. But because I didn't grow up with religion, I did not associate that to like beings or entities. That I don't know really what I did associate it with. But as I got a little bit older, when I say older, like into my teenage years, and became more disillusioned with the world, I'd say that I pretty much considered myself an atheist, right? But like not like one of these angry atheists that thought that someone who believed something different than me was somehow stupid or whatever, but just like, I don't know, it wasn't really part of my reality. Like my education was fairly like scientific based, and It just wasn't super present in my life. I was an athlete, and that's very physical and very real. And even though I was surrounded by a lot of religious people in gym, I was a gymnast, right? And there was a lot of religious people at the gym. They were like just kind of different people than my family was, right? But how sort of all-encompassing and challenging that particular endeavor is very physically probably largely led me to believe that like physical reality is the supreme sort of being, and everything else is sort of, you know, not necessarily less than that, but sort of, you know, underneath that in some way. And then, you know, as I sort of went through life, I had some challenging times with depression and with drugs and whatnot. But I also found my way to electronic music and to the rave scene and to psychedelic drugs and to sort of very edge type of experiences. And those started to reveal sort of what was behind the curtain, or sort of on the other side of the veil that maybe I had sensed before. So I started to understand that there were many realities, not just one. Some of them were physical, some of them were not. And so like my mind was open that way. I still probably would have considered myself an atheist, but like I wasn't sort of dogmatic about it. And then in 2005, my brother passed away. My stepbrother passed away in a unexpected and tragic scenario. And I had a series of events like over the course of the next probably 6 months to a year that involved my brother and music and drugs and some strange interactions with, he obviously wasn't here in the physical realm anymore, but I was still having interactions with him in some way, including I had been stung by a bee and I had to take Benadryl, right? Because my ankle was like all swollen, and Benadryl is like a huge psychedelic drug for me. I don't know why. I trip harder with Benadryl than I do with like regular psychedelics. And so I had taken some Benadryl, and my brother was like sitting in the corner of my room talking to me all night long, right? And in the morning when I woke up and I was no longer tripping, I noticed it was like really hot in the house. And so I like was trying to figure out what was going on. And when I was upstairs, I realized there was the window was broken in the bedroom that used to be his. And there was a baseball on the floor in the bedroom, and he had been a baseball player, right? So I had just had this night of having him sit in the corner of my room. And then there was a hole in his bedroom window and the baseball there. I'm like, well, that's pretty weird. And I chalked it up to weirdness. And then I had a very strange sort of all-encompassing interaction with him at Coachella in the dance music tent that I've talked about it several times on my show, so I'm not going to go over it again. Okay. But essentially, I had like a fairly large dose of mushrooms out in the desert when it was really hot, and I had like almost like what felt kind of like a religious experience, like people make the pilgrimage to Mecca or some shit like that. I'm out there in the desert and hot and tripping. And another really interesting sort of experience with him. And so from that point, I would say I was agnostic. Like I was like, something is going on that is not as simple as just like the hard material reality that, you know, I kind of believed for most of my life. I'm not sure what that is. The religious stuff I hear from people doesn't really appeal to me, but like these other sort of realities that I've kind of experienced, and then these types of things have left me open. So I sort of began my more like directed metaphysical quest from there. So I would say I'm metaphysical. I'm interested in the esoteric. I'm interested in the occult. But I also recognize that a lot of people who are interested in those things, or a lot of people even just within our own information community here, whether you consider that, you know, the esoteric community or the alternative media or the conspiracy realm or whatever, a lot of them are just playing out like new forms of sort of religious thinking. And I definitely am not a religious thinker, right? I can oftentimes sort of identify the difference in the way that I reason through a situation, or the kind of like logic train I go down on versus like someone else I may be talking to about something to the difference between someone who's raised with religious thinking and someone who is not raised with religious type of thinking. So, I'd say that I'm open. The two people who I spend the most amount of time with right now are my girlfriend and then a coworker I have at my regular job. And he doesn't think I'm very spiritual, and he thinks I'm the most spiritual person he's ever met. So that's my stance.
Well, I dig the contrast. No, I was curious because, before we start diving into things, because I heard you talk about the energies, and actually, what's funny is Diana has a very similar background. Do you want to go into that just a little bit, or kind of ask her about hers, because she grew up in a completely atheist background, and it's funny for me. Like I grew up in I joke that I grew up in the middle of the schism, because on my mom's side of the family it was Roman Catholic. My dad's side of the family, it was Greek Orthodox. I was sitting and standing constantly, and kneeling, sit, stand, kneel, sit, stand over and over again. But yeah, Diana, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Just that it was almost identical, except both my parents, I guess, would have come from Christian backgrounds, but they were both already atheist before I even came around, because they're both of the mentality, if God exists, he's an asshole. And then that was that. And then so anytime I'd ask them, they didn't overly say we're atheists, but we didn't go to church and every single thing. And if God was mentioned, he was an asshole. And there was no love for God in the house. And they thought that people that believed in God were dumb. And the Bible was dumb, because they were actually very smart. I think they were original star seeds in that way, but they never woke up enough. So it just left them in that bitter place. And then even you talk about raves, and in Canada, raves weren't a thing. So I was a clubber. I got really into clubs, because there is something about that energy, the music, the group dancing, the lights. It does something. It's spiritual. I still even miss it, but it does something to you. So when I was an atheist, it was my way of attaching to spirit, and I was obsessed with clubs and all that. So I totally vibe with that. And I love your energy.
Well, thank you. And nice to meet you, Diana.
Yes, you too.
Yeah. I know we were playing phone tag. We were trying to play phone tag. We both got busy and things, and but nonetheless, let's kind of start diving into some things. So, that's interesting that you said that it is. It's I feel like, we've seen frequency alter our DNA. Right. We know that frequency has the capability to even cause epigenetic changes within us and things like that too. And that's honestly, one of my biggest theories is it seems to be a lot of people who go into the rave scene, because the rave scene too, talking about peace, love, unity, respect. That's what it was originally about back in the day. It sucks it's kind of changed now, but it's not the same anymore now. But I'm convinced, in some ways, it's potentially, you look at the setting, you have the trance music, you have everybody in this altered state of consciousness. I'm just convinced that it does have a profound effect on our DNA. And what it does is it opens us up to these greater perspectives. Like you were saying, you saw the different realities. You had almost a religious experience there. And I think what it does, I don't know, in your research, Emily, have you looked into the junk DNA a lot? That's something I wanted to ask you, if you've ever kind of dived into that, and maybe what its attributes are for us as humanity. This was one of the big questions I wanted to ask you last time. I didn't get a chance to ask you, but I'm just curious if you've dove into that and maybe have some insights for us on it.
So a couple of things. So first of all, I'm now to the place where, with my sort of research and my interest in all of this, I've come full circle back to the point at which I entered it, which was I entered this space through the portal of electronic music. Because that was when I first started recognizing on a level that was not just my parents are lying to me about how the world really works, right? The kind of thing from when I was a kid or whatever, right? And that was where I really started questioning, what is this? Who am I? How does it work? And then just the way that things played out, sort of timing wise and whatnot. I had to go on this huge sort of, think of it as a walkabout or a vision quest that, took me through all of these different phases of understanding. And now I'm back to the place where I've always I've kept going. I never stopped going to parties. They changed. Deep in the outlet for me, it's like deep underground parties. It's not really raves. It's more like a different kind. It's a more sophisticated sound and like more particular. It isn't just like, oh, let's all be happy together like some of the raves in the 90s sort of were. It's a more specific, more sort of grown up kind of thing. But
Gotcha.
my whole sort of journey with information, I was also going to parties, and I recognize, and so to me, the two things are related. And at this point, like I am back to where like I recognize how important the electronic music is to my thought process, to the unique perspective I bring to all of this. It isn't just background music for it. It's actually part of what is driving whatever the fuck it is that my brain is doing with the stimuli coming at me, right? It is a main driver of it. And so I think that when it comes right down to this, because the main portion of my research has really been into, you know, MK Ultra and things related to that, that we're talking about stimuli and whether those stimuli be chemical in the case of drugs, you know, sonic or audio in the case of sound, and light, right? Like whatever we're experiencing here is those stimuli and how they're interacting with our consciousness, or what, you know, how our sort of brain is firing and putting things together and whatnot, right? And so my new project is really going to be sort of on, this is going to sound fucking weird, but I was thinking about it today, a love letter to both techno music, which is the style of dance music that I most prefer, and also to MK Ultra, because it's been these two things have been the biggest influence on my life. And that might sound weird to people. Most people are like, MK Ultra is awful, I'm a survivor, this or whatever. And I'm not saying that those things are not true, but it's not the whole thing. It has brought the most amount of sort of interesting content and intellectual stimuli and curiosity and whatever it is to my life. And so I appreciate the experience, and I see the experience really differently now than I did when I first began. And DNA is wrapped into all of that, because DNA is so operant on all three of those things, on chemicals, on sound, on light. That's part of what sort of, you know, you might have the same DNA as your sibling, but the way that things turn out, you know, or a similar DNA, right? The way things turn out for you, you mentioned epigenetics, is completely different because you process light, sound, information, all of that kind of stuff differently. And so the way that the DNA decides to sort of, and again, I'm not an expert, this is not technical terminology, but the way it sort of selects which page from the book it's going to sort of play the story of out, right? Or unfold itself on some level is highly dependent on those things. I have had experiences at parties where I have watched like the dance of DNA, where I have felt what you're talking about, myself getting little like almost upgrades, or having all of my cells like somatically vibrated to the point that like it shakes off, like everything, all the puzzle pieces or whatever being completely shaken and put back together in a different way. And I literally walk out of the party a different version of myself than I walked in, having released a lot of the sort of perceptions or programming or negativity or whatever thing is going on for me that had things like held together in a specific way. They got like a huge reorganization, not to the point that I didn't know or remember who I was, but like I saw everything differently after that night of dancing, and I felt everything differently, and everything made sense to me in a completely like in a more resolved or holistic way when I left in the morning than when I got there the night before, right? And so, you know, whether, and when I go into an environment, like I go to some really interesting parties, it is the highest end sound and lighting environment that really you can go into in an underground setting, right? And so I see it that way at this point. I approach it more like an athlete preparing for a competition, because like that's how hard my reality and my consciousness and my body is going to be worked, right? And I like that. I like it. And I like every weird little idea that goes through my mind, every way of sort of looking at things. And at the end of the night, I sort of feel like I just got completely refreshed, completely cleansed, but without having to like, lose all of the learning I did before that happened.
I completely understand with what you're saying there. And, it's very interesting because, I mean, even since we're on this topic, you brought up MK Ultra, and I mean, even when we're looking at techno, techno most of the time happens to be the beats per minute of the human heart. A lot of the times it's this beat. So, one of the biggest things, because we know how MK Ultra has infiltrated music. We know that there's a lot of things that have happened with, I mean, even not just with MK Ultra, we have the Tavistock Institute creating, these musical acts, even the CIA getting involved in things like that. So I'm just curious, in your experience, have you potentially even seen in some of these parties, have you seen some, maybe what I would call not so good effects from it? Do you think maybe at all there could potentially be some form of MK Ultra in techno music, or have you ever experienced anything along those lines?
I mean, I have probably hundreds of hours talking about my ever evolving, sort of perspective on what's going on, what's being used for what has infiltrated what has affected what. And it's been a long road for me. And like, there was more sort of paranoid periods where like everything was that, and then there's with other periods where it's like maybe I sort of was out over my skis in some of my assessments, and maybe like when you're like if you're a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, and so I was looking for those things, right? And then now I have kind of this perspective where I see it going both ways. So yes, I'm 100% certain that intelligence agencies have infiltrated the electronic music scene at various levels, and whether they actually started it or whether they discovered it early on and infiltrated on some level, like that is there. That doesn't mean it's fully infiltrated. It doesn't mean it's in every bit or whatever it is, but that ship has sailed. Our entire reality is infiltrated with that. There's like almost no corner of anything that doesn't have someone at least observing because this is interesting or whatever. But I would say that the other thing is also true, that the music has infiltrated the intelligence agencies, and those people have found something there that they didn't expect or that they appreciate or that they want to be part of as well. And they're being influenced. The same thing that like you went to a party and you felt the vibes and it changed how you connected to whatever, that is happening even to people who are sent there to do some shitty thing or whatever the fuck it is, right? I also recognize completely that like all of the technologies and weaponry, or however you think of it, that is part of these projects and programs, it's literally, MK Ultra is literally all about frequencies like sound, light, chemicals, to a certain degree, hypnosis, which a lot of that kind of music can be seen as like hypnotic or trance-inducing or whatever it is, right? And so there are practitioners in the underground that have nothing to do with any of that, that are better at it than the CIA or that Tavistock or whatever it is, right? And so just because they're good at it doesn't mean that they're part of that other thing. I'd say they're learning from some of those people. And of course, there have been party promoters, sound and lighting people, DJs who over time have been revealed to have connections that are disturbing. A lot of times in underground music scenes, suddenly parties are getting shut down, weird things are happening. You find out there's this rat or this person who is doing this. There's different groups of people that are, with drugs, and all kinds of shit happens, but it happens everywhere, right? And I know for myself, like at this point, that for me, it's really much all about my relationship with the sound and like what that experience makes me think, feel, want to do, all of that kind of stuff. And I am confident in my own mind. Now, that doesn't mean I can't be influenced by something or someone else. But like once I have a thought or idea, I really think it through. And I really, exercise the shit out of it and come to an understanding of like, where did this idea come from? Is it my own, or did it come from somewhere else? If it came from somewhere else, does that mean it's invalid or whatever, right? So there's a level of responsibility that comes with liking the exposure to those kinds of dynamic stimulus, intense environments. That is why I show up to parties in a much different condition now than like I used to during the heyday of my drug use. Like during the heyday of my drug use, I was the most paranoid about that because I was also discovering that I had a past that highly resembled what at that time, what people were reporting with MK Ultra kind of stuff. But I was going to parties because I liked them. And that fear was making kind of everything that, which on some levels also made my hand play right into whatever that was, right? So it's a level of awareness. It's a level of personal responsibility. And it's also like, I'm now at the place where I think that the very dark, very sort of evil, very like maniacal, portions of MK Ultra that we've been allowed to know about are actually only a very small portion of everything that they were doing. And there's a whole other side to that I'm not saying is wonderful. Like I don't like things that are outside of people's consent, but I have a feeling that the news that things that they discovered were not all bad, that they discovered a lot of shit about human potential that is really cool. And I suggest that we get over on some level, doesn't mean forget, but get over our outrage and spark up our curiosity. Because the results of the good news on some level, when I say the good news, I don't mean they did great things with it, but the results of the news that like, wow, humans are fascinating beings and we should do things to copy them are being employed and deployed in technologies that are people are like, oh my God, wow, that's so cool. Like, how are they fucking doing that? Even if it's a technology that's used to surveil, and missing the part that like, it was the same information that they learned about people in all of those projects that have been fed into the corporations developing those technologies. And so literally it's like they're stealing our intellectual property and selling it back to us as a surveillance weapon on some level, right? But the reason that we're not able to put two and two together. So if these things are all based on us, well, what else can I do with the inspiration that I gave them? I'm not talking about me personally, but all of us, right? Gotcha. Gave them, that were the source of the projects that led to the technologies that have now sort of been, inverted and shot back to us, right?
I know, and I actually, there's a couple things I want to touch on that you just said. Diana, did you have anything you wanted to add?
Just the thoughts thing and other thoughts coming into your head. The truth is like, there's no thoughts that are ours, and it's all about choosing. So when you are strong in thine own self, you get used to your own frequency, because every thought's not your own, but a lot of thoughts are like, they permeate in your general frequency, and they're kind of like normally the ones you vibe with. But so when stuff's getting shot at you that's super not you, and you are in like a sovereign place, you don't need to fear. So like going to these things, if MK Ultra can do whatever they want, if you are strong enough, nothing frequency wise can really, I mean, it can like be a nuisance. It's not like it's going to be like good, but like, you don't need to worry about it taking you over. So I can see that, in the strength being like, you can go anyways.
I mean, there are like sound weapons, but like, I'll be honest with you, like sometimes I go to a party, I'm like, yeah, this ain't for me, and I leave, right? Like, I don't like what's there, right? And to what you said about like thoughts maybe not being your own, I can't tell you how many times like I've been at a party and I'm having some like interesting set of thoughts, and I'll like find my friend and I'll start saying a sentence, and then they'll finish it because they've been thinking about the same thing and we hadn't been talking for the last hour and a half or 2 hours, right? So whether, there is, and I don't mean this in the most Orwellian version of this, I mean this in, many other instances, suppose that could be it too. Like hive minds are being created when you're all being entrained to the same rhythm, right? And so you can look at it as like, oh, I don't like that. I don't like a hive mind, which I understand the distaste of that on some level because of the way it's been sold to it. But it's like, is kind of cool that for the hours that you're there, you're like exposed to like more brain power, more compute power, more sort of ideas than you would be just sitting by yourself at home. And it's like you said, being strong in yourself, knowing what to do with them, like, and spending time thinking about what you learned or thought about later when you're not in that condition of being in the exciting environment. And I will have all kinds of crazy ideas when I'm at parties, and then I go home and I research. And like and what's fascinating to me is like how much science my brain produces when I'm at parties. like how many ideas that I will go home and I'm like, wow, they're like, this is like kind of a high level idea. This is not what I was thinking about before I got there. Like, you know, what was it? What frequency hit what part of, like, made my brain fire in a way that produced some sort of reaction that for some reason the content that, you know, unfolded itself on that level was this set of information. And this gets back to what you were asking me about junk DNA, right? So no, I've not ever spent a lot of time looking into junk DNA because it always felt like a lie to me.
Oh,
right?
100%.
Okay.
I always felt like that.
100%.
Always felt like, you know, like with everything, the part that we don't use or the part that we throw away doesn't necessarily. It's not necessarily useless. It just has a different.
Just because they don't understand it, that's how
Correct.
egoic they are. Just because they don't understand it, it's
Correct.
junk. Like talk about the ego.
Exactly,
I mean, I think that like in our DNA, and I had this conversation with your friend Don Rogers, who I enjoyed getting to know a few weeks ago, right? Like the information that can be stored in our DNA somehow equals about the length of the known age of the universe, right? So it's like all the information is there. And the part that like maybe they're calling junk is just like the part of the library we haven't read yet. So like
Absolutely.
maybe by the time I'm like 95, I will have like gone to enough parties where those books have been shaken off the shelf and I've had a chance to roll through them, right? And so I just think it's the part we haven't done yet. Like, you know, if you went to the library every day, right, there would still be probably a larger portion of the library that you hadn't read than the part that you had read. And so most people don't do like a lot of reading or a lot of thinking about a lot of this stuff. And so that's a convenient story or narrative. But you guys, I'm sure this has happened to you where like you find some interesting idea, you start researching it, and then you discover that somehow in some weird way it like connects back to your genetics or your family or someone in your family was part of that discovery or lived in the city that happened, right? It always happens like this. And so I think that's what it is. And eventually you will be attracted to the sets of information in the library that are most pertinent to you. And it's just a question of like, do you ask that next question when the idea occurs? Do you decide to open the book or do you just accept that it's there?
Absolutely no, and both of your points I resonate with very heavily. I mean, it's not truly junk. I mean, your analogy you just used about the library, you know, that just sells it. I mean, and even based on the conversation we had last time, you know, and how my perspective got shifted when it came to a couple of things, ultimately I think the answers for that are just right under our noses. You know, it's just going to take opening up that other portion of that library or opening up that other portion of that book and actually diving in. No, I know exactly what you mean. I've been at a lot of electronic music festivals myself where I would get these ideas or like these trains of thoughts that would just run through my mind. And, you know, I would go home and research it and find just like this amazing amount of synchronicities that would end up tying in either something that had to do with me or something along the lines of something that I knew about. I think it's very profoundly amazing. And that's actually why I kind of want to dive into you just a little bit with, you know, the human potential aspect of MK Ultra. And the reason why, because that's something that really interests me. And based on our conversation we had last time too, like I said, you shifted my perspective on a lot of things. And when you're coming out and you're saying, you know, that this isn't all bad, there was some good to actually come out of it. I think that's a way we need to kind of look at things. Again, my inner anarchist screams at things being done without our consent. You know what I mean? It just kind of gives me like a visceral feeling. But I'm curious to see like some of the positives that they have found about human potential, because that's ultimately like, you know, what a lot of us are doing on our spiritual evolution and our, you know, evolution to better ourselves as human beings. You know, we're trying to tap into these different tiers or maybe these unexplored limits of the human potential, you know? So I would definitely like to pick your brain on that a little bit, on what you have found out about that and what we are potentially capable of that we are not aware of just yet.
So again, to be clear, because I also have, you know, a voluntarist heart, right?
Yes, exactly.
I'm really not okay at all with things being done without people's consent, nor am I okay with people like participating in something like where, okay, I participated in something, but I didn't get to understand the results of it or like what the purpose of it really was. So I believe in informed consent. And then I also believe in the person who participated getting to sort of, when I say benefit, I don't necessarily mean financially, but maybe that could be part of the, right? That isn't my point with this, but like where a person gets to understand what this was, why, what can be done with it. If I went through, again, and this could be for anyone, not just myself, if I went through some sort of training or process or experimentation, what did you learn and how can I sort of benefit from that process, right? So I'm just being clear before we start. Like I'm not, I'm, you know, I'm just done. Like I went through more than 10 years of anger and outrage and all of that kind of stuff. And then I realized that like at a certain point that only gets you like about 10 or 20% towards where you're trying to get to. And then at a certain point, you have to put that aside and go, okay, what was really going on here? Right. And so I think there's there's a lot of stuff, right? Because, you know, there's about of the projects related to MK Ultra that we know about, there's probably somewhere around 200, right? There's like a bunch of codenamed projects, and then there's 149 documented sub-projects. There's probably many more that we don't have documents in the same way for because they got transferred to being under corporate control and whatnot, right? So let's just pretend, let's roll the number out like about 200 for right now, right? And they're all dealing with different, slightly different, in some cases very, very different sort of ideas, techniques, technologies, chemicals, different kinds of things. Some of them are related to the other, like it seems to me like a lot of times what happens is you do one thing and you get a set of results that maybe was what you thought it was going to be or what wasn't what you thought it was going to be. And then the part that you didn't expect or the part that sort of stood out the most then becomes the inspiration for the next project, and on and on and on and on and on, right? And each of these things were being done at different locations, whether those locations were hospitals, universities, certain kinds of like foundations or NGOs or even some corporations or whatnot, right? And there would be sort of a secret group assembled that sort of really like exercised this idea out. So in some ways you could look at it almost like the mystery cults of old, right? And all of those mystery cults, right, were also based around things like drugs, music, you know, some, you know, sort of like interdimensional idol wars, whatever it is, right? And later they sort of got, you know, pushed out, and this like more organized religion devoid of anything like super interesting but great for creating control replaced it. So you could almost look at like each project was sort of its own little cult or little mystery cult, like a scientific cult or something like that. And people were being put through rites and initiations and whatnot. And they were documenting and keeping track of the outcomes of this, right? And my guess would be that like, so some of the obvious things are that like, how is it possible that we're getting all of the information when so many of the projects were using drugs and psychedelics, right? But we just get the story that they were using it to turn people into mind-controlled zombies with no memory, or Manchurian candidates, or someone to assassinate the president. How many people, okay, I've done more drugs than your average researcher and more research than your average drug user. But of all the drugs, all the people I've ever done drugs with, all the drugs I've ever done, and I've done a lot of them, and I've been around a lot of weird people. In that time, I've only seen like one or two people where I'm like, that fucker's doing something weird. People need to watch him. Everyone else has something that ranges from, you know, an exhilarating, or maybe they don't like it and they're a little paranoid, but they get over it pretty quickly, or someone is, you know, freaking out on like the extra stuff that they can see, or the telepathy they're having with the friend they're doing it with, or the scientific idea that occurs to them. So like it had to be that at least 50% or more of the people that they tested the drugs out did not say like something that would like tickle the fancy of someone who was trying to murder the president or something like that. And instead we're like having what we think of as like the interesting thoughts we have when we're on acid or mushrooms or whatever it is, right? So my guess would be that like those documents are not the ones they showed us, and those documents went into something else, whether that went right away into corporations, or whether the idea that happened when they got discovered was like, okay, we will do the church commission and create fake transparency. We'll make ourselves look bad, and then we'll say we'll stop. And people will be satisfied because the information we gave them made us look bad, right? We said it made us look like we were doing dark, evil shit. And I'm not saying they weren't doing dark, evil shit, right? But you like, it's impossible that like with all the, I mean, I've read the summaries of the various 149 different projects and whatever it is. And like some of them are quite weird, right? So, and a lot of them have to do with like using our biology for batteries or technological means. A lot of them have to do with magic and hypnosis and all kinds of other stuff, right? You know, but so there's a lot of stuff there, and only a few of them were like really outright about subverting someone's will. Like some of them definitely were, right? But there were some that were just like, you know, not that at all. And then I'm sure there's also plenty of projects we have no sort of documentation about at all. And again, I'm also at the place where like, I don't even trust documents anymore. There's nothing easier to forge than documents. And the only thing a document is evidence of for me at this point, and I'm being a little like lazy in the way I'm talking about this right now, is that somebody had an idea about something and wrote it down. Maybe they did it, maybe they didn't, maybe they made it up, maybe it is really documenting something or whatever it is, but it was a thought that was out there at some time and it ended up on a piece of paper. And some of the evidence comes from like billing and how they paid people, and that's how they kind of followed it up and proved that some of it was sort of true. But like all of the places that were doing these things are also places where like the most successful programs and people and whatever in our country have come out of. So like it can't just be that like it's impossible that everything has just been about creating hypnotized Manchurian candidates. They're going to kill the president and you know whatever, like have sex with men and get them to say things that they wouldn't normally say if they weren't fucked up on drugs. Like sure, that's part of it, but there has to have been. I mean, have you both done drugs? Have you all both done mushrooms?
Emily, let me tell you what. I have a house in the DMT realm.
That's right. Yes.
Okay. I have a house in the DMT realm. Oh, no, most certainly. Yeah.
Okay. So just think about that, right? Okay. So let's just say if enough people, you know, like whatever, if they did something with DMT, if enough people start saying that they have a house in the DMT realm, you bet that they were going to say, well, can you describe it to me? And then when they figure out that multiple people are describing the same house, then I'm sure the next question is, well, that house has got to be there then, because these two people don't know each other. We gave them, you know, they weren't, it's not like they were sitting in the room together doing it and talking about it. We gave them the doses on separate days, but in the same location, and they described seeing the same thing, right? Like, I wonder if there's something there, if it's there at a frequency band that is not our normal one, but if it's there consistently, can we map it out? As a matter of fact, you've got Imperial, I think it's Imperial College or King's College London, the same one that gave us fucking 2 weeks to flatten the curve, doing the fucking extended state DMT trials right now, mapping out hyperspace. I think it's a terrible idea to let people who gave us 2 weeks to flatten the curve map out hyperspace, but it's happening 100%. Nonetheless, which means that they understand, based on the reports people gave to them, that there is something there. And if there's something there, they want to know how it works. And so I think we should probably know how it works too.
Mm-hmm. Well, absolutely. I mean, one of the things I'm even going to say about that too. I mean, I think so. I heard about that place in the UK that was doing it. I also thought MIT was also doing a study on it as well.
There's a couple of different projects on it, slightly different versions of the same thing. Yeah.
But no, I'm 100% with you. I mean, you know, I don't trust the people who are telling us we had 2 weeks to flatten the curve to do that as well. But, you know, it's very interesting what you're saying, though, because there seems to be some kind of what I would call objective underlying aspect to that experience, to that we share. I mean, you know, like you were just saying, like, I mean, we could have two people at two different locations. They can have both the same dose of DMT and they're going to describe the same house. So one thing I'm even kind of starting to look towards too is it possible there was some kind of reciprocation of interest in these studies? Like, and that's also, the next thing I'm.
Yeah.
Go ahead. What were you gonna say? Go.
Yeah, this is the whole, everything they do, if they're doing it for one reason, something else is going to pop up. It's not like they're just like checking to see if they leave the rat a piece of cheese, will they eat it, right? Like these are more complex things. And so even if they are looking for one thing, they're getting different answers. So either they're going to explore those different answers, or the person who participated is like, that shit was a really weird experience. Like the experiment is done, but like, I'm going to go try it again myself. So there's interest being created on both sides. And like, even right now I'm reading a book called LSD Dreams, and it documents sort of the history of what went on both in like government and then in like pop culture since the discovery of LSD. And it's very, very clear that the government was equally as interested in the people that they sort of rejected working with as the ones that they accepted working with. It's just once somebody thinks that they've been sort of rejected, or they think they're running or doing their own things, they now become useful for like a different portion of the examination. Right. And so then you have a group that thinks that they're towing the line, a group that feels like they're the rebels, right? They think they're running their own show. I don't know if that's true or not. Right. And then they start fighting. That group breaks up because this one was an egomaniac and this one was, or whatever it is. So every time there's like a fissure, right, amongst people who are aware of something that the larger public isn't, it like opens up a new avenue of research. And that avenue is open both for the people who are like wanting to conduct and control it, and for the people who are participating, right? Suddenly, like there's some new understanding and the whole world looks different. And this happens over and over and over again. And we're at so many levels of abstraction at this point, right, that we don't all live in the same world.
Oh, 100%, 100%. Diana, you got anything you want to add to that before I ask my next question?
Yeah, and I would hope so, because I was thinking timelines as soon as you said that thing about them mapping out the etheric realm and they're going to be diddling with that. I had fear, and I don't like fear, and I don't give into fear. So I was like instantly already telling myself like, I'll just switch timelines and worry now that I know that's a thing. So then the fact that we don't all live in the same reality, I completely agree with. And it's all about frequency. And then I keep hoping like that split we talk about, that one day it'll be like complete and they're not even a factor. But either way, like we can still do it to the fact that they won't affect us, because that's kind of scary.
Okay, so here, this is what my mind does with it at this point, right? There was a point where I was like, very outraged by some of these ideas and felt like that. This is what my mind does with it now. Okay, so maybe there's something else there. Maybe it's been there since the beginning, since before time even existed, because it is kind of weird that like when you take psychedelics, you see things that look like the most famous cathedrals in the world, right? Uh-huh. And I was never a person interested in cathedrals. So it's not like I saw the cathedral and then that made me trip the cathedral. It's like, no, I had all these psychedelic experiences. And then one day someone showed me a picture of a cathedral and I'm like, well, that's weird that my mind knew about that before I did and created that, right? So maybe there's, all of this different, like fantastic sort of, frequency-based or sonic architecture that exists at different layers of reality. And the people who built those things are captured it in their memory. And they're like, oh my God, I saw the most fantastic thing. I have to build a monument to this experience, this religious, this psychedelic, whatever experience that I had, right? Something more like that. So if that's the case, that exists out there. And, I don't know if that can be fucked with by intelligence agencies. You can fuck with people and the way they might experience that, right? So I think that there's a couple of things that happen. Once enough evidence comes forward that like people are like, okay, there's definitely something there. Like, I don't know if you guys know who Danny Goler is. He's been on my show a couple of times. He's the guy that with the laser and the code and the DMT, like he discovered.
Yes. I've seen him.
Laser. Right. If you just shine a diffracted laser at a surface while you're on DMT, you'll see code running between the laser and the wall. And thousands of people have done this. And I have mixed feelings about where some of this is going. I should probably check in with him again and have a conversation about some of that. But there seems to be something there, right? Okay.
Almost certainly.
So if it's there, then the systems of control or whatever will become interested in hearing how people talk about this. And but what they would like to probably do on some level is see if they can make their own. I don't know that their first thought is, can we tinker with that, or can we control that? I'm sure there are some people with large egos that think that, but they maybe try it, they maybe fail, or they don't have the level of success, or maybe some of them are humble and realize, well, I probably can't do anything to that one, but we can create a technology that does almost a similar thing. And the people who haven't been to the real one or aren't aware that that exists will be as impressed with this as we are with that. And we can use this to keep people content in a more enclosed society. And I think that's more the issue that we're sort of bumping up against here, is that, once something new is discovered, the tendency amongst sort of people who think of themselves as elites or advanced or whatever is to make that exclusively available to them and their friends or their whatever, and they won't necessarily close it off to people who are trying to figure it out or go it alone, but they're not going to go tell the whole population, don't worry if your life fucking sucks. There's 9 million other realities and you can go to any of them. Right. But if they're having trouble controlling a population and they want people to be, satisfied or pacified enough with their own life that they're not wanting to rock the boat or demand something different or better, then if you can create a closed system that operates on the same sort of phenomena, which again is the technology of the larger universe, the larger whatever, we're living in some kind of computational system that produces some kind of simulation that you interact with. I don't think we're living in a simulation. I think it's a little different than that, right? But there's stimuli that are interacting and connecting with the whatever you're projecting or whatever.
We're layered through the dimensions.
It's
so
layered
there's
and
other
we're
parts of us. Yeah.
Right.
Layers is a great way to describe it.
Yeah. And so I think that's what happens. And to your other question, one of the things that the next layer of advancement in technology that's coming are going to be DNA based technologies. And that's another way that they're maximizing human potential. They have people under quite a psychological operation, right? They've convinced us that they think of us as peons and that they like only one thing. It's not true. They love genetic diversity, right? Eugenics is to use, in my opinion, the people as resources, not to rid them from the planet. It's just not. But they love that we think that, or I don't think that, but a lot of people think that, because it creates a story where there's not curiosity for these other things. But all of these new technologies are going to be DNA based. And so it's not the same DNA is going to work for all the technologies. There's going to be technologies that are personally based on each individual's DNA. Then there are other technologies that are going to be using the most sort of specific, almost customized type DNA that are superconductive, able to, do things that, I always talk about this article. I brought it up on, I think when I was on with Dawn or some other thing I was on recently. I read this article a couple of years ago about, DNA basically being the solution to the longstanding problem of how to, do fusion without expending more energy than you'll get from the interaction, because it's difficult to do it with the whole need to cool it. But there is DNA that codes to create these carbon nanotubes that are able to sort of cool themselves as they're, heating, because they're superconductive. They're superconductive at room temperature, not just in the cold. Most superconductivity occurs. You see those videos where there's ice and something is flying around, like a superconductor. Have you seen what I'm talking about?
Yeah. So it's on the track. Yeah. So what they do is they actually stick the superconductor in liquid nitrogen.
Correct.
And they run it across a magnetic track, and actually, so that'll actually generate unlimited voltage as well. That's
you have to keep everything cool for that to work, and to create large amounts of nuclear energy through fusion you have to, like, it's too hard to cool all of that. But some of these technologies are going to allow for superconductivity at room temperature or even at like warm temperatures that are going to allow things to happen. That's just one. There are so many technologies, right, like that are in the works that are DNA based. And if you look at like the Stargate that was announced, like on the first day of President Trump's, after he was inaugurated, right? Larry Ellison literally worked on the Stargate project in the CIA, and then they close that, and he goes and he worked on Oracle project. Oracle project, right? Mm-hmm. Not Stargate, Oracle project, and then that closed, and he opened Oracle Corporation. That is basically, it does a lot of things, but mostly what it does is gather, analyze, harvest data, and all of that kind of stuff. And they're talking about Project Stargate, which is going to use, they're going to use AI to create, medicines to resolve cancer and this, that, and the other thing. But they're all going to be sort of genetically based. So they're going to be collecting all of the genetic material. And anybody who's researched into different kinds of projects are aware of Stargate, which has to do with teleportation, remote viewing, portals, things like that, which to me is kind of like the code that, it's the DNA connection, right? So they're going to harvest your DNA because they know that DNA is the answer to sort of some of those problems. And what you're going to get in return is a pill in case you get cancer or something like that, right? Or, it's a little more complicated than that. But the reason that they're so interested in collecting so much biological data is because if you think, like, let's just say that every portal has only one key, right? Only one person can, I'm not saying there are portals that aren't like that, but like if unique genetics are the key to specific kinds of unlockings of energy or opening of portals, right? Well, they're going to want the keys to all the rooms, right? And a way to do that is to create a million reasons to collect people's genetics, whether that's PCR tests, or whether that's 23andMe, or whether that's someone in your family got cancer, so we better get to work creating personalized cancer drugs for you so you don't get it. They want to go after it all. Sorry for the long rant.
No. Because I have some things. So what's interesting to me, you're talking about them trying to harness these new DNA technologies. You brought up cathedrals. Mm-hmm. Right. And this is something we didn't get a chance to talk about on our last show. I remember I brought it up to you briefly beforehand because I wanted to show you that. So when we're talking about cathedrals and, we're talking about these old Gothic cathedrals, right? Like, this is kind of what we see during this DMT experience or this LSD experience. We have a lot of these visuals. Well, what's very interesting about these Gothic cathedrals is they are an unfolded tesseract. That's how they are built. So, for those of you who don't know what a tesseract is, it's a fourth dimensional hypercube. It's almost a cube that moves in and out of itself in a rotating pattern. But when you actually take this four-dimensional hypercube and you unfold it, you get a 3D crucifix, also called cruciform. But what's really interesting about what you're saying, though, is NIH has discovered, that we actually have cruciform structures in our DNA. We actually have these little tiny three-dimensional cross-like structures that are in our DNA that actually function with genetic expression and certain, if I'm correct, not only genetic expression, but they actually have a instance of repairing telomeres under certain circumstances and things like that. I'm wondering if this is what they're going to be trying to utilize, because, when we look at the connection, right? We talk about LSD, we talk about higher states of consciousness, right? We talk about tapping into these higher transcendental meditative states. And we have a lot of these people having these. I actually wanted to bring this up real quick because there's a lot of people who, when you look at some of this architecture. So what I have here is the Tahian glazed archway. And, we look at this architecture here, and this could only be something out of a psychedelic experience, right? But back to my point, what I'm saying is I'm wondering if there's something to that. I'm wondering if there's something to the cruciform structures that are in our DNA, because one of the biggest things I've talked about too is I'm sure you've seen this too. There's a lot of symbolism in this reality.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's quite a bit. So that's interesting that they're trying to start, you know, upping this DNA technology. I know we talked about it a little bit last time, but I'm wondering if this is something they're potentially looking for. And another thing I want to add to what you were saying as well, like, yes, you know, as far as these renegade groups that they have this reciprocative interest with, I mean, look at what happened in the 60s. I mean, look at the whole movement, you know, the flower childs, what I would even potentially call maybe the first baby awakening that ever occurred. I know, but you know, the intelligence agencies kind of took off and ran with that. So I'm wondering if there's kind of like some kind of culmination. You know, you're seeing all of this research like throughout the years that they've been doing on us, our behaviors, our patterns, and things like that. Ultimately, do you think, in your own words, that this is all going to add up to this DNA-based technology? Is this going to add maybe to a different way of life that we could potentially see emerge here within potentially our lifetimes?
So, okay, so you said a lot of interesting things. And first of all, I looked up the cruciform DNA structures, and it is really interesting. It creates what, like, my friend Misaki would call like a crossroads, which is part of it's like a spiritual sort of concept that does have to do with sort of like pathways or timelines and dimensions and portals and all of that kind of stuff. So interesting. I hadn't looked at the cruciform structures in the DNA, but yes, it's getting at the same kind of thing. Also, when you go and you look at some of the supercomputers and the quantum computers and whatnot, they look, a lot of them, like some ancient temples, and they have this very spiritual, metaphysical like look to them, right? So I think these are just the modern day sort of iteration of what these sort of ideas or visionary states have always like sort of looked like, right? What was you said? What was your question? You asked me a specific thing about. You were going into something about DNA, and you had a specific question, but I had on that.
No. You're okay. I mean, do you think potentially there has been some kind of research?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I think this has been going on since the beginning of time, right? But it looks way different today because of our modern way of life and our technology. Like, think about this. And I love, like, you know, he says a lot of wild stuff, and he's not for everybody, but I love listening to Amon Hillman talk about ancient drug use, like drug use in antiquity, and the way that the medicine women in the mystery cults used to keep track of the mixtures of the different chemicals, drugs and herbs, and what people exactly saw at this dosage, at this dosage, at this dosage, how the things that they saw connected to scientific discovery, philosophy, medicine, all of this kind of stuff. So I think from the beginning of time, it's pretty much like each person is unique. We've got something different going on in our bodies, whether we're talking different DNA, different kinds of, you know, trace elements in our blood, different, you know, pasts where we perceive information differently based on things we've already experienced. You give that each different person, you know, let's say everybody took the same substance, people are going to have slightly different responses to that same substance. And all of that information is interesting, but it's the same way. It's the same thing as saying, if I take your DNA or your genetics or your body and expose it to this drug or this chemical or this energy field or whatever, like, is that the new technologies? It's the way each thing interacts with each other, like the whatever the sort of the result of the two things coming together is, like, has a different sort of answer or can do a different thing. We're finishing watching season 2 of Twin Peaks. I do a series with my girlfriend, and I do a series with Chris and Hunter from The Melt called Dark Matter.
Oh yeah. Yeah,
we talk about Twin Peaks. We're going to do other shows besides Twin Peaks. So we started with Twin Peaks, and we just finished watching the last 2 episodes of season 2 last night. So we'll record tomorrow. And in this second to last episode of the season, Briggs, who's like the Air Force, sort of guy, Colonel Briggs or whatever. I can't remember what his position is in the military. Major Briggs, right? He had worked on Project Blue Book, which at a certain point they realized was not about space, but was about an interdimensional portal in the woods of Twin Peaks. And the portal has 2 doors, and one goes to the Black Lodge and one goes to the White Lodge. Fear and love open the doors, right? So this is like when something happens, a person has a response, and that response is either terrifying or pleasant and warm. So fear and love open up these sort of extended realities, and it's a slightly different thing for each person, right? Like not everybody opens the door under the same conditions. So, I think it was different in ancient Greece or back in India during Vedic time, whatever it is, where they were sitting in positions or doing dances or singing songs that built up energy fields, and then they were taking certain herbs or whatever it is, and they were going into visionary states or extended like states where they were almost manic or delirious, but they grabbed something from outside the time stream, some bit of wisdom or knowledge or an idea, and then came back with that. And if you look at some of those things, they are very, very similar to what our medicine, our technology, our science, our philosophy, even our fucking politics is based on. It's just once you figure out you can do something, you don't want to do it. Some people might want to do it haphazardly because that's part of the fun and the magic of it, right? But if you're trying to create a scientific dictatorship, you want to know that the precise same thing that you think is going to happen will happen every time. So you set about creating machines or chemical processes to repeat over and over and over again the outcome that you got that one night with the magical combination of drugs and fear and singing the right song and whatever it is, right? And so it looks different now. I don't know if you guys ever watched the OA. Did you ever watch the OA?
So I started watching it. I never got the chance to finish it though.
So they do these dance moves to jump dimensions, right? But it requires like all 5 or 6 of them doing it together, and they're able to sort of move between the realms. And the doctor who was like trying to mind control them wanted to be able to do it without them. So he built these like machines that would like do the dance moves because he didn't have 5 people to do it with, right? But machines were like doing the same thing that the people's bodies were doing. So it created the same effect. And then there was this one other traveler who was a lone traveler. Like she wasn't doing fucked up shit like the doctor, but she had figured out to jump dimensions, she needed to have partners too, but she didn't have them. So she made herself these little tiny devices to put around herself that would like do the moves while she danced in the middle. So here you have like 3 different ways of achieving the same result based on your ability to do something or your conditions or who else you're with or whatever it is, right? Everything is like that. And how else can we do it?
Well, and that makes sense. I mean, we look at a lot of these, methods almost. It seems that there's, what I would say is some kind of organic way to go about it, just as you were saying. There's a way that works with the makeup of this existence, and it works with, I guess you could say, this natural laws that would occur here to do it that way. But then you also have those on the end who are trying to replicate it in the synthetic way. I wanted to ask you, because since we're talking TV shows right now, did you ever see the Black Mirror episode Joan is Awful?
No, I've only ever seen one episode of Black Mirror, and it was the one where like the person was like watching a Netflix series of herself being played.
That's the one. Yeah,
that's the only one. Okay.
So, but like you were saying with the quantum computers, right? Like, because in that episode, that that's one of the only ones you ever really hear me talk deeply about, because what she ended up finding out was that the network had this quantum computer.
Right.
And what it was doing is it was running these different simulations of realities on these different layers, you know, and that's why like they had like, you know, they would go into the one reality and they would be the one person is awful and it would be their whole lifespan on the TV show. And then you would go into, you know, the other person is awful and it would be their same span as well. You know, and what I'm diving into with that is, you know, you brought up the fear love polarity as well. And I think that is why ultimately that fear and love have this effect too, because, you know, when we look at love, fear is just on the other end of the polarity spectrum as love. You know what I mean? And you know, we see love, you know, I would even say this, just based on my experience, that love's some kind of force. It's more than just an emotion. It actually interacts with our external reality. You know, and in the processes as well. I mean, if we're using our mental faculties when we're working our way through this reality from the basis of love, ultimately we're going to have a different experience. But then it's like, you know, when we're working our mental faculties, you know, through the basis of fear, you know, we're ultimately going to have a different experience. So what's really interesting to me, what you were even saying about that lodge, on how that love can open the door to the white lodge, and that this fear can open the door to the black lodge. I mean, to me, what we see is just this component of these two things that ultimately make up a huge aspect of our reality, interacting and being a cause for us to potentially travel these worlds, even like what you're saying with the dance moves and things like that as well. So I'm curious. I mean, in your research, before I go on, Diana, did you want to add anything potentially?
Just that, like what you said about the dancing, you see mirrored by Native Americans and your natives, period, wherever they are. And also the Indians had, like India had actual like dancing that they would do stuff.
The
But you see-
mudras, they like do they tend to do them with
Yeah.
their hands as
Yeah,
opposed
and their
to
legs
they
do all
stuff
kinds
with
of
their
stuff.
body. But like the
Mhm.
mudras are very similar to like some of those kinds of dance moves.
They're apparently
And then,
light
like,
language. The mudras are light language, I'm learning recently.
right, there's all kinds of ways of sort of understanding or unpacking that. You know, but yes, it's that same kind of thing. Something you said, what was I gonna say? Go with your question. I lost it.
No, you're okay. So ultimately, I'm wondering if you think that at this point we're gearing back towards those kind of methods. I mean, do you think it's possible that, you know, because like I said, you know, you were saying you believe this has gone on since the beginning of time. Or since the beginning, humans started walking upright, and, you know, we had civilization, society, which I actually completely agree with. I do think it has been going on that long. I mean, I'm ultimately wondering if we're going to be coming like full circle back to that almost. Is that something? It seems like we're having this rise towards, like, you know, what I would call this technocratic, you know, this AI, a lot of people, you know, working with AI, these different technologies. I'm wondering if we're going to ultimately come back to that. And I'm wondering if that ever came up in your research while you were looking through a lot of this stuff. Did they ultimately find that these natural methods worked better than the synthetic ones?
I think they just do something different, right? So
Okay.
so I know what I was going to say, and then I'll answer that question.
Yeah, no worries.
Different thing. So like, I think that in order to get someone to like do something extra, to have like this sort of edge experience, or to maximize the potential of a specific situation, okay, then you like, they need to be sort of excited in some way. Like, you know, like with athletes or performers, they get adrenaline, they get nervous. And for some of them, that makes them perform their best, and others, it makes them choke. But like, they're in your, like, I know from competing in gymnastics that like doing my stuff in a competition felt completely different than in practice. And depending on your mental state, you can either have like a performance that exceeds what you're normally able to do, or like sometimes you're too anxious and it goes a bad way, right? But different things get different people to a state where they're sort of like getting an adrenaline rush, or exuding like an almost like over unity amount of energy, just kind of like cold fusion or free energy technologies. The idea is 0 point or over unity energies create more energy than they use. And when you have like all of this adrenaline or whatever it is that is more likely to happen. It's a different thing that gets certain people to that state. Some people get to that state through fear. Others get there through like love, or what I call like excitement. Like, you're not going to get me generally to perform really well by scaring me. But if you expose me to something that really gets me turned up or dialed up or whatever it is, like, that's when I'm going to kind of jump out of my skin in a sort of good way. But for some people, like, that doesn't do it for them. They need to be scared. They need to be terrified. And so I think they found that like lots of different kinds of conditions got people to perform extra in different ways. And so some people might get put into a program where they were just doing shit that was like torture or scaring the shit out of them all the time, because that's the thing that made them perform. And like for someone like me, maybe it's like, like, let her go, fucking hear the music and dance and do the things and have the crazy ideas, because she'll fucking get on the internet and talk about them and we can record whatever the fuck it is, right? Like, I think there's different methods to get people to like sort of overstep their normal range of performance, right? And I think they were interested in pursuing all of them. And then to what you said about the, are we going back to that? Both and. Right? Like, I do think like many things are going to be created, right? And there are going to be people doing what would be considered the extraordinary or the extra through technological means. There's going to be some people doing it through the old-fashioned alchemical means. There's going to be people doing it through like literally like hard work and excellent performance. There's going to be controlled situations. There's going to be Wild West situations. It's not, I don't think there's going to be like a uniform version of how all of this rolls out. I do think that like the technology is going to be more and more appearing to be like magic, but there's going to be like your purists who prefer to do it the old fashioned way. And then there's going to be a lot of stuff in between. There's going to be a lot of people who, use technology as a booster for some of their magic, or use magic as a booster for some of their technology. You're going to have people going completely off grid and practicing magic sort of outside of the, the overarching control system. You're going to have people who learn how to disguise it, performing it from within, right? I don't think we're just going to go into one homogenized version of whatever it is. But yes, gotcha. We're going to start seeing things that like have this sort of, ancient, esoteric, or occultic sort of feel to it, with all of that symbology more and more and more, right? But a lot of people are not going to recognize it, right? If you have the eyes to see it, you're going to be like, this is fucking crazy, dude. Like, I went downtown and it was like I went through like 12 initiatory rites and saw 3 sages and, got high on 12 different herbs and whatever, or at least it felt like it did, or whatever it is. Right. And then other people will be like, I went to the mall. It's just kind of the same as usual. Right. It's like what your sort of level of awareness is, and like how determines what you can interact with.
Understood. No, and I completely agree with you. And the one thing I wanted to add in there real quick is you were talking about the different conditions that they test people. Do you feel that GATE program, the GATE program potentially falls into that as well? Because that's something that's kind of been starting to surface a little bit more lately. I know I've done shows on it. I've had conferences on it, but I'm wondering if that's maybe like an early testing stage, or maybe like an early testing ground for them, especially because, when we're talking about kids and we're talking about children, they're not conditioned like we are. A lot of them are not conditioned by the narrative of reality that we live in. They are very open, and they seem to have these abilities. So I'm just wondering, in your eyes, if you think maybe that the GATE program could potentially be a stepping stone for them when they're testing this stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think GATE and Project Talent before that, these were ways of like casting a wide net, getting everybody sort of tested on some level. And but I think that there's like there's like a couple of false narratives, in my opinion. And I'm not here to refute what other people think, or
of course, yeah.
This is just after more than 20 years of research and a whole lifetime of personal experience, and sort of like how I'm thinking about it right now. is there's a lot of false narratives, but the ones pertaining to this are that, like, if you are tested for something, you're either found to be special, and so then you kind of, get scooted off into this group that is, goes into some project or tested upon some more or whatever. And then if you're sort of discarded, like, that's just it. You're not special. You live a normal, whatever life. No, like that. That is not, like, because they're not just looking for one thing. And so, like, maybe they, just like I was saying with MK Ultra, like, maybe they're trying to create someone to assassinate the president, but instead they end up with someone who's, like, describing the cathedral to them. They're not going to be like, well, we're just going to throw cathedral person away because that wasn't what we were looking for. We're going to note that cathedral person did this. And, like, later when we're studying cathedrals, we'll come back. So they're kind of noting, sort of what the disposition and the perceptive nature, or like what the person is inclined to. I think they're sort of getting everyone sort of tested and like, sort of, when I say on a track, I don't necessarily mean like they're guiding a person in a specific way, although I do think some of that happens. But it's like, okay, like, this person seems to have these aptitudes at this time, later you may interact with something else that is kind of similar. But, just because you are sort of, like, my dad, one time I asked him, are you sure you've never done any work for the intelligence agencies? And he's like, I'm sure, because I went on an interview for the CIA and I got rejected. And so, and then all of a sudden the next day I got a call from Project Crossroads and I was off to Africa. I'm like, okay, right? Like, right? Like, so a lot of times it's like sifting, right? Like, this person is not for this, but it's for this. And this person, we don't have anything for them right now, but, like, maybe there'll be something later, right? So there's that, the portion of it. Another, like, narrative that I think is, like, out there that's always been false is that, like, the people with the Rh negative blood are the special ones, and everyone, no, just the Rh negative blood does different things, has different potentials and tendencies than the other ones. But if everyone is believing that if they don't have Rh negative blood, then, like, they're not special in some way, all the variations are special. They're just special for different reasons, right? So everybody is, like, the whole thing is at play for everybody on some level all the time, right? Like, it just, it just kind of depends, right? So the other thing is, like, a lot of those testings seemed to be about one thing, but they were, like, really about another. It wasn't so much about, like, getting the right answer or showing how smart you were. Sometimes it was about, like, testing to see if the kid is intuitive or telepathic, right? So it wasn't like, here, we're giving you this puzzle. If you don't solve it, you're dumb. It's like, we're going to give you the puzzle, and then we're going to have someone in the room send you information. And even if that information is the wrong answer, if you do the thing that somebody, like, sent you telepathically, and it's like a weird thing, and you do that, we know you're telepathic. We don't really give a shit if you solve the puzzle or not. We wanted to see if you pick up subtle information in the field, right? There's all these different kinds of things that they were looking at that weren't necessarily what the test was supposed to be about.
Absolutely. And honestly, one thing that's what I really like about you is you break it down. It's not a black and white topic. I feel, one thing in the conspiracy community and the truth community, I mean, even when we're talking about things like this, is like you were saying earlier in the show, well, like, now they dislike us for it, or you know what I mean, or it's like it's only, or now we gave them something to hate us for. But we kind of we see that mentality when we're in the truth community, when we're looking at topics such as this. I mean, especially with things as GATE program, but really what you reveal, and this is what I like, is there's it's not as black and white as it seems. There's these other variables, these other things that are potentially at play, that are kind of being utilized almost in what I would say, even though some of them might be against our will, don't get me wrong, but are almost being, like, utilized in this reciprocative manner. It's like exactly. It's not
all the dumb fucking data they collect from as they're observing you through your phone and shit like that. Like, who fucking cares if you, like, eat a banana while you're sitting on the toilet? Like, how is that helpful? Like, blackmail you with that or whatever it is. But there's, like, all these tiny little things about your personality that are being revealed by all this, like, weird little stuff. And then maybe they'll send you an ad, for bananas or whatever, like, some admonishment to see, like, what your response is, because that creates, like, another layer of data. Like, data is the new not even that new, but it just the way it's collected is new, is like oil or gold or whatever it is, right? Like the information about like people are the greatest fucking resource on the planet. It's not diamonds, it's not gold, it's not oil, it's data. And so there is no wasted information, right? And that goes for all of these testing programs. It goes for like all of that kind of stuff. Is like they would rather have the information than not have the information. And, you know, like this narrative that we've been fed that there's like only some information or special information that they're really interested in. And if that's not you, you've got nothing to worry about. It's not a problem that they're spying on you or whatever. No, they want to know. It's like they're building the fucking Oracle. It's literally called Oracle Corporation, right? Like they can see everything. They know everything. And it isn't so much about like knowing what you're going to do so they can like bother you on Tuesday afternoon but they'll do that too. But like, it is just really about like leaving no stone unturned. Like these fuckers, and I kind of can't blame them, want to know everything. I want to know everything, right? This place is fucking fascinating. It's like, what the fuck is this? Right? Like, how did this happen?
I'm 100% with you. I mean, that's a question. That's a question, you know, where each of us are diving into each day. You know, I at least, you know, at least one time a day, like look up and maybe think to myself, like, what in the actual fuck is going on here?
What in the
you know, we all have that. Diana, do you have anything you want to ask Rad?
No, that's a lot for everybody to like unpack, and like what we're heading into in the future. There is so many questions we have, because like a lot of us do research in the ancient research and all this stuff to build up the spirituality that was taken from us. Like that's what I do. Like when you were talking about stargates there and the DNA, like one of the ways the stargates used to work, so they say, and they have research in Peru where they've really dived into this, is your DNA had a match to get through the stargate. So this is ancient verified as far as we can know these things. So like what you're saying and speaking of the future, and like just hopefully as many people as possible keep waking up, because like you're saying, the data they're collecting, that's a lot. And then the sheeple, like one of the things that just gets me so much with this world is I'll be so positive and I surround myself with positive people, good friends, to keep the vibe high. But then sometimes I'm shown what the rest of humanity is actually like, and it's like daunting, because there's so many people still happy about giving away their power, giving away their sovereignty, having the government tell them what to do, when how is it not overarchingly obvious that the government is not your friend? The medical industry is not your friend. The educational system is not your friend. Even the historians, the ones that were the mainstream famous ones, are not your friend. Religious leaders, not your friend. Like you have to do this. The research you've done, Emily, is just top notch and next level. I don't know if I've definitely never met somebody that's done as much research as you. And it's just fantastic. And I just want to commend you for that, because that's a service to everybody.
So
you know, the one thing I want to ask real quick though, after you're done answering her, you know, let's talk about the positive and the negative blood types for a little. Let's kind of you know, put some reason into it. But go ahead, answer her real quick.
So there's plenty of people out there that have done way more research than me. I'm a little bit like, a lot of people are like hard and fast researchers, and we need those people. I had to ground myself in a lot of that knowledge, because like, I take flying leaps. A lot of what I do is spitballing or what ifing based on the things that I know, cross-referencing something I learned a long time ago with an experience I had last week. And why is the two things that seem like they're not connected keep making me think of each other together? And so where's the through line? So like people who do that hard and fast, very structured, very disciplined research, like allow spitballers like me to have a good time and bring creativity and imagination and whatever it is to this. I've also done, you know, a fair amount of research, right? Like I used to be awake 26 hours a day when I was a tweaker. So there was a lot of time for research. I followed, you know, all the way down to every rabbit hole. You know, so I think part of it is just, I allow myself to make the free association, to think the next thing that seems like it's off limits and sort of dive into that and sort of play with ideas, because
you're tapped in. You're tapped in.
Yeah, I allow myself to go there. I don't think that sounds too crazy. I'm not going to, because that just becomes like shackles, right? And you know, what I say to people is like, we don't all need to know the same stuff. Like it sort of becomes like dogma in our community that like you have got to know about this and this and this and this and this. You need to know all the things. And on some level, I can respect that. But on another level, it's like, well, no, if we all just know all the same things, that's actually going to limit the amount of stuff we can all collectively know. So if everybody like pursues the thing that they're like most truly interested in, or that they offer like the most sort of unique amount of insight into, and then we confer with each other and see where these things sort of, you know, connect and cross-reference each other, like that's when we actually start like building out the more interesting sort of hive mind or oracle or whatever the fuck it is, right? And so that's what it is like I just go with what interests me, and then like that excitement, that energy like gives me the juice to jump to the next sort of whatever it is, right? But you know, I had some good basics in the beginning, and I lean on people who, for whatever reason, either they're like more quiet and patient than I am, they're more disciplined than I am, or they just don't have as wild of an imagination as I do. So like they stick with the research, like that. Learning from them allows me to do that. So I just wanted to be clear about that, but thank you for the compliment. And as for the positive and negative bloodlines or blood types and things like that, like I don't really know so much what to think about what is going on with blood types anymore, for a couple of reasons. Like apparently there's like some new blood type that came about like a couple of years ago. I don't know if you heard about that.
Was that RH neutral? Was that potentially RH neutral or something like that?
I don't remember what it was. I just remember that there was some, right? And then the other thing is like, I have had this weird thing myself, and I know a few other people, including I think a person that we know, that we both know, that seem to have changed blood types over the course of their life. Like I used to be one blood type and now I'm a different blood type. And I don't know how that happened. Like it's not something I like care about or fixate on or whatever it is.
Exactly. Yeah.
But I don't know if blood types are this really fixed thing that we've been taught. I think maybe it's kind of more like the epigenetic or whatever. I don't know. I think that I don't know for sure. Like I don't have evidence to say this one way or another. But you know, I think that it's not quite as simple as like, this is your blood type. It'll always be your blood type, you know, especially like whatever we're living in now is like something very different than we were living in even when I was a kid, just in terms of like the overall soup we live in. And I don't know if mutations are happening. I don't know if those mutations are good things or bad things. Like maybe people's blood types are changing in order to adapt them to the new condition they're living in, rather than fall victim to, you know, whatever is going on. So for me, I'm more in like, I don't really think about this is my blood type or your blood type. I'm more interested in like the sort of trace elements that are in different people's blood. I'm interested in like who's carrying what inside of them. And I see like blood types as being, and again, there's like nothing super scientific about what I'm saying. I'm just like, this is kind of how I see it. It's kind of like, you know, we all have a skeleton, and some people are thinner and some people are taller and some people are bigger boned and some people have a short torso or long legs or whatever it is. But like, I maybe like the blood type is kind of like sort of like a version of that. Like there's like some scaffolding there, and then like how you build out your body is dependent on a lot of things about your choices, your lifestyle, where you are, like all of this kind of stuff. So the stuff that's inside of us that makes us me different than you or whatever, like some of it's coming from our parents, some of it is coming from, you know, the environment we live in, but also like what sounds are we exposing ourselves to? What light are we exposing ourselves to? What is the diet we eat? What is that, like what supplements we take? Like I think we're you know, it's kind of funny because we're all very concerned about like damaging our DNA, or something about like we don't want to take shots because it might like do. And I don't want to take them either. I'm not saying people should take them, but like a lot of people who are very, very concerned about any medical interventions, like literally are eating food that is doing like equally bad or strange stuff to their bodies, or taking drugs, or even they're doing something that they think is good for them, like drinking diet soda or taking some sort of like diet drug that like over time is like literally rewriting their biology on some level, but they're doing it because they wanted to, not because the government told them to. So somehow they see it as different, but it isn't that different, right? Like, one of the things that was going on during COVID or whatever was like people would, they talk about like, oh, is there like graphene in the things, right? Remember that whole conversation?
There was the one, there was the one too. I don't know if you saw this as well. And I did find that new blood type out. We can bring it up after this, but I don't. So this is the one thing that kind of drove me nuts about the vax a little bit. Of course, I didn't take it on my opinions, but there was a conspiracy going around. It was the end of 2023. And it was floating around TikTok, and I couldn't believe people were buying this up. But I don't know if you guys remember the new emergency service signal that happened. I think it was it was somewhere in January of 2024, right. And there were people going around stating that the emergency signal is going to activate the graphene nanobots.
Right.
From the vaccine in your body, and you're going to turn into some kind of freak of nature or some kind of zombie along those lines. But no. And but exactly what you're saying, there's a lot of dogma that needs to kind of be crushed. You know what I mean?
I'm not saying anything good or bad about anything, but like people were concerned about the graphene. And if you would look into like the diagrams or the videos about what graphene might do inside of you and what the particles of graphene look like, it actually looked like almost the same as the thing called C60 that like a lot of people were taking.
Carbon 60.
Yeah, including myself. I had taken that at a certain point, right? Like it creates these sort of buckyball looking hexagon things, right? And whatever. And people were taking it. I get C60 might be fine. Graphene might not be. It isn't I'm not making a judgment about stuff, right? But like a lot of times we are taking things that are like doing things that sound like an awful lot like the things that we don't want to take are also doing. And so like being a human in a body is like an experiment every day, right? And so it's just in terms of like what is going on with our biology, I'm sure it looks a lot different like inside, than it did 20, 50, 100 years ago. And I don't know that can all be boiled down to like one thing that happened in 2020 or whatever it is. We've been like, the soup has been shifting and changing and building, and we're doing different things. And so like we're all kind of self-transforming machine elves or whatever that Terrence McKenna said about the DMT, right? We're all kind of doing that. We're all interacting with technology and the environment and food and all of that kind of stuff in different ways than one another. And so we're like building out like a different technology that is Stephen, that is Diana, that is Emily, right? Like, I mean, I think, I don't know that we're not some like ancient form of technology that has just developed so much character and patina that we think of it as organic, when like maybe we're not really that different than the Westworld robots. I don't know, like, right? Maybe. I don't know.
Well, it's interesting that you say that because I mean, there's a lot of people who compare like this experience, like you were even talking about the simulation thing before. There's a lot of people who think we're potentially a form of artificial intelligence, like an organic form that has incarnated here, and that we're having
the ego is. The ego is.
I definitely agree with that. And it's interesting that you say that. Real quick, I want to bring up that new blood type real fast because it's actually kind of quite interesting, if you don't mind. So this is something I haven't seen before, and I do agree with you, Emily. I think we have the capability to shift and morph ourselves. Absolutely. That's what I live by. That's what Diana lives by.
That's what our mission is. We're supposed to go from 2-strand DNA to 12-strand DNA, and then eventually 24-strand DNA.
And so this was the
And
new
then
blood
out
type.
there that think DNA doesn't even exist. Just like viruses don't exist, there's an argument that can be made that DNA does not exist in the body in the way that people think of it.
And
Hmm.
I would completely agree with that also too. It's almost like you know, when you look at it and how it acts, I mean, and you look at how our telomeres act, it almost seems like it's etheric to a degree. It's not
Yeah.
exactly
It's like a receptor.
physical.
It's receiving
Yes.
a signal kind of thing.
Right. And the signal dictates what it's doing at that moment. But like when somebody takes a DNA sample, it's just like a memory of what the DNA was doing at that moment in time. Right. It is not like a substance.
Yeah.
It is. And you know what's really interesting? I mean, there's a lot of people who have made comparisons to DNA and water because of how malleable water is, and you know, water can hold and store a lot of information. The information can change on the water based on the intention that is put forth on it. But real quick, let's take a look at this because this is actually kind of interesting. So they have in September 2024, researchers discovered a new blood group system called the MAL, solving a 50-year-old mystery surrounding the ANWJ blood group antigen, which is something I've never heard of. But that just is just letting credence to your point.
Yeah.
I'm going to do some more research on that, but it is, you know, when you're talking about DNA, I mean, it's a lot like we are malleable. I mean, epigenetics would not exist if we were stuck in a certain, you know, rigid set of rules and laws when it comes to this. I mean, you know, epigenetics is basically the whole field of epigenetics is choosing your genetic expression. So that right there shows, I mean, that's talking about what you said. I mean, is this even something that actually exists? Is this some kind of etheric projection that could potentially kind of give way to some kind of awareness to even be here along those lines? And I mean, even, you know, from what Diana was saying, is it possible, you know, we're going from these 2 strands to these 12 strands and up to 24? I mean, really, when we're looking at this, I mean, it's all malleable. Everything is, you know, and I think really this is where I even come in and I talk about how our mental faculties actually really, and I mean, really, really interact with this experience. And I mean, you know, just kind of like what you were saying, you have these individuals who, you know, the love is what gets them going. Love and excitement is what gets them going. And then you have these individuals, they got to be afraid. They got to be in that state of mesmerized terror, you know, and in order to actually, you know, see these things. So it's very interesting, everything that you're saying as far as this malleability goes and how we ourselves could be these self-transforming machine elves. And I mean, you know, that's actually Terrence McKenna actually spoke about that possibility too. He talked about how the ion is the child within us. And it's very possible that this could have some kind of reciprocating relationship. But I actually am glad you touched on that because, you know, this is something you and I resonated so much on in our last episode, the dogma in our community.
Mm-hmm.
You know, it's almost like, you know, you have to have this individual who's like, you have to listen to my intel and only my intel.
Right.
And if you listen to anybody else's intel, you're wrong, and vice versa. But really what we can see is this is all very multifaceted. You know, there's a lot of layers to everything.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's you know, each person has like a different angle on stuff and different perspectives, and the more sort of unique we can each become in our perception, right, and the better we can get at explaining our thoughts or like clarifying our perspective to other people so that we can have a conversation about it. You from your perspective, me from my perspective, Diana from hers, and we can get together and do this mind meld and sort of explore the most amount of ideas possible instead of spending the time trying to convince one another that, or like gain consensus. Like we don't need to have sort of this agreement about everything, right? We can get a lot farther if I'm listening to what you say and you're listening to what I say, and maybe we intersect and agree on some of the things, but like we're sort of throwing out the most amount of possibilities and having somewhat of a reasonable conversation about it based on the fact that I've taken time to really think about what it is I think about, and so have you. And so when we get together to talk about it, we're able to sort of unpack for each other what we actually mean and sort of get to some new understanding of each other that doesn't require us to sort of sign on for the whole project of Emily, Diana, or Stephen, right? So
Well, definitely after this, you have me wanting to go out to the sand dudes here in Colorado with a giant San Pedro cactus, and you just have me wanting to go out there and just give myself a mini Coachella in the middle of the sand dudes. But no, nonetheless, man, I think we'll go ahead and we'll wind it down here for tonight. But I want to say that Emily, of course, you always impress me. I've never have a conversation with you. Even the first conversation we had where I walked out the same, even the phone conversation we had, even before you came on the first time, I did not walk out of the same of that. And, honestly, man, somebody here said this comment I'm going to bring up. This is probably one of your viewers. Emily does a gymnastic dance through and she is a seer. Somehow all synchronized with my growth. She's a spear tip. Ooh, rah. I'm going to go ahead and definitely agree with that. But nonetheless, so I have your links, of course, at the bottom. Tell Chris and Hunter I said hello. I haven't spoken to them in a while. And I have all of your links at the bottom of the description. But if there's anything else you're working on specifically at this point in time, aside from that new show or anywhere else anybody could find you, why don't you let them know now?
That my YouTube channel is sort of the place where you can branch off into all the other things. I'm also on Patreon, patreon.com/offplanetmedia, emilymoyer.locals.com, and a small amount of stuff still on rockfin.com/Emily Moyer. I have projects with various other creators, and sometime this summer I'll be debuting my new series. I'm not quite ready to let go the name of it yet. I'm still sort of working on graphics and aesthetics for it. It's sort of morphed and changed as I have imagined it. And like at a certain point, I'm going to have to become realistic about how much I can actually sort of bite off and chew, but it will be, largely about sort of, my time, my time in the underground, whether that underground is the underground bases of MK Ultra or the underground warehouses of Los Angeles, my time in the underground and what I have learned about myself, about the world, how it works, our place in it, awesome sounds to go along with it, a lot of like wild ideas thrown out there, but essentially sort of an analysis of the chemical sound light factory we live in.
Dude, I love it, and I'm honestly looking forward to that. And again, like I know we talked about it last time, if you need some help with graphics, let me know. Let me know what you're thinking about. We can maybe I can help you out with that. And of course, this was Diana's first show co-hosting, and I have Diana's links too.
Excellent job, Diana.
Yeah. And I have her links at the bottom of the description too. But anything else you want to announce, Diana? Anything that you're working on as of right now?
Oh, no, that's okay. I just want to say that this was great, Emily, and I love your energy. And I want to say that, like, I like the way you put stuff, because a lot of the time in the conspiracy theory world, like, it's very doom and gloom, but you found a way to teach it in like an enlightened way. And I like that.
I have to have a good time or I'm not doing it. So yeah, it's kind of not everything has to be fun, but I have to have like some fun every day. And if you can do the same thing and sort of have a good time with it, then why not? Right. So I try. Thank you.
you do a fantastic job. Emily, if you can hang out just for a couple minutes after the show is over. Alrighty, guys, thanks again for joining me for this almost didn't happen BG Cast Wednesday live podcast. No problem. 1 hour, 6 glass 1. I appreciate you being here. Next week, we're going to have my guest from the Order of Melchizedek on. She is coming on, and we are going to be discussing a little bit more of the DNA. We're going to be discussing the Sophia bloodline and what the Order of Melchizedek actually is. So this is going to be pretty interesting. I hope it gives everybody some insights to what this potentially is. This is a first for me as well. And I'm actually looking forward to that conversation. But other than that, thank you again for joining me for another BG Cast Wednesday Live podcast. We have a saying here: stay safe, stay free, but most importantly, stay sovereign. You guys have a great night. Take care.